everybody, this is Catherine here, kind of setting myself up at my one of my spaces in my studio, and today I'm just gonna give us a little talk about laying out your palette. It's pretty simple to do, and of course there's a lot of different palettes that you can create when you're preparing to create a painting, whether it's in acrylics, watercolors, you know, oil paints. It's always important in my view to lay out your palette. And it's good to develop a consistent habit with that. I think that's one of the things that I like about it. Like I start to understand, or just I know where my yellow is, where my blues are, where my neutrals are. So I just go there on the palette. Plus for me, it looks pretty. I like the whole sort of way of the sequence of color. And I think it makes mixing a little bit easier too. You know, it just makes making those color mixing choices a little bit simpler. So there's a lot of different types of palettes. For oil painting, I usually use something like this. This came off of came with one of the French easels that I have, a half box French easel, and it's pretty used up. I don't use this one a lot now, but I like to keep my extra palettes around because sometimes this is great for plein air. Sometimes they come in handy. So, the masonite panels can come in a lot of different shapes. I have a large oval one. I've got a much larger one that I use on a regular basis. It's probably like at least double the size of this one. And they all have this little thumb hole. So if you're, standing, you can mix your paints easily. I don't tend to use that. I usually have this propped on like the drawer in on my French easel, so I don't have to use the thumb hole, but it's nice to know that it's there. And then for acrylics, if you like to work in acrylics, this is a handy thing. This is called a disposable palette. This one's I've had for a while. It's by Utrecht, and it's a large size. I like the larger size because then I feel like I have room to mix. And it's just sheets of paper. They sort of remind me of like a wax paper feel. And so the acrylics, I would just lay them out. I can spritz them on here, and then when I'm done, I can just tear this off and throw it away. So it's really portable. it's easy to use. You could also use it for oil paints. I like the wooden palette, and I tend to leave I leave my oil paints on there. I don't clean them off after each use. And one of the things that somewhere I learned this, a tip is to sometimes I'll put a saran wrap over it, and if you keep them in your freezer, they stay soft. Otherwise, if you leave them out, which I do that a lot, I paint pretty regularly, but still I'll leave them out, and there's little, for the oil paints, the skin can sort of solidify, which isn't a big deal because I can just go in, the next day, or if I'm 2 days before I paint again, and just, you can kind of scrape that off. But it does, waste paint, depending on how, how you feel about that. So there's just a lot of different things you can do to preserve your paints, and different ways to lay them out. So today I'm just going to start with, actually I'm going to use this because I'm going to just demonstrate it with acrylics. And so I always go light to dark, and I'm just going to start with the primary colors. So it would be like a limited palette for this conversation, and that's always a good way to start working with painting if you're a beginner, is with a limited palette, because the whole subject of color can get pretty involved. There's a lot to it. So I just start usually I'll go from left to right. And one of the things I learned in a workshop that I did some years ago, this artist, he would make 2 piles of white. So one for mixing with your, your warmer colors, and one for mixing with the cooler colors. And that's a takeaway that I still use today. It seems handy, and I like the idea of keeping the 2 sort of separate. But so anyways, for me now, I still start with the white. So the white I put usually on the bottom left-hand corner, and I'll do 2 little piles. For this example, I'm just going to do one because I don't want to be wasting a lot of paint. So I just do the white first, and then I would move around to my, in this case I'm using a cadmium yellow. Then I would put the yellow down, and you just kind of arc it around the outer perimeter of the palette. Then I'm adding a cadmium red, and I'll lift this up so you can see. And then I'm using an ultramarine blue. Then I would put my blue down. And that would be my limited palette. So I personally don't use black in my paintings. Sometimes I'll use the earth tones. So if I have earth tones that I want to put down, or I know that I might be using in a painting, I'll put those on the far right in their own little grouping. So I didn't pull any earth tones out for this example, but that might mean like a yellow ochre or a burnt sienna, raw umber, things like that. And again, I would take those earth tones because there's a range of lightness to those, and start again with going light to dark. So that's essentially how I would lay out my palette. And then, as you experiment more with the colors and adding colors in, the thing with and I'll just say this, so here we have the primary colors like yellow, red, and blue, and from those three you can pretty much mix any other color and then you can add in white and of course black if you want to vary the the tint and the tone of the color that you're mixing. And it's nice to add, for me, I like to add other colors in sometimes, especially for like a flower. If I get the tube color, it's a little bit more intense than the mixed color. So usually I don't go too broad with adding a whole bunch of other colors, but for this example, usually on my palette I will have an orange, so I would put that, like I have the white, I have the yellow, then I would put the orange, because that's a combination of yellow and red, and would be the next one after yellow before red. And then I would just go to green. In this case I have a Viridian green, and that would be the yellow. If you were to mix yellow and blue, that makes green. I tend to put that after the red. Maybe other people do that differently, but I tend to look at the green and view it as lighter than the blue. And of course there's different kinds of greens, there's a lot of different kinds of blues. So this is just a general sort of suggestion. And then I like to have a violet in my palette, so I would put the violet after the blue. And violet's a combination of, would be red and blue. So this is sort of how it might look. I don't know if you can get a good view of that here. And then, you're kind of set to go. So you can just, you can you can pull a little bit of yellow, you can pull a little bit of red, you can mix your orange, you can pull some white with the yellow, white with the orange, white with the red. And then just a whole other world opens up in terms of like what you can do with color. And then I will say too, when you're going to mix with white, you always want to start with the white first. You'll use less paint that way. If you start with the color and then you start to add white, it can take a lot of paint to get it to the lightness that you want. So it's best to start with the white first and then add little tiny bits of color until you get to the the hue that you like. What else do I want to say about color? So I showed you my other palette, and then a fun thing to do. Well, this is a palette that was this artist J. Warren Shepherd, and you can look him up on Google. He has some beautiful paintings, but this was given to my one of my aunts, I guess it would be a great aunt. Yeah, it was my grandmother's sister. It says January 28th, 1955. So this is one of his palettes. That's a whole other fun thing to look at. If you Google like artist palettes, master painter palettes, you can get a whole bunch of different pictures of like what some of the masters used and the differences. This one to me looks a little chaotic, but that's okay. It worked for this guy, and it's certainly old, but there's like, on this one, there's like, this blob of like a light cadmium red. There's a white down here. There's a lot of like black or dark blue. It's a pretty dark palette, but this is also quite old, so I'm sure the colors have shifted over time. But it's just interesting. They're fun to look at, and kind of artworks, you know, in their own right. So I hope that's helpful for you beginners laying out your palette. It's really simple to do, and I hope you have fun in exploring color and with your painting. And thanks so much for listening to me today. Bye now.